This lesson is the essentials of creating classes in C#. Now that we've had an overview of object-oriented, let's dive in and start creating some classes. So let's talk about creating properties. We can use a simple property declaration that looks like this. Public data type, in this case int, product ID, and then within curly braces, you specify get semicolon, set semicolon. That defines a public property that can be used to get and set data within a class. We can also do a full property declaration. In this case, you create a private variable. Private just means it can't be seen outside of the class. Private decimal underscore list price. Now, underscore is a convention. It's typically used for private variables within a class. Then we create a public decimal list price, no underscore. And then within the curly braces, we do a full get and setter. These are called getters and setter methods. So we do a get, open curly brace, return underscore list price, semicolon, and then close the curly brace. So that returns whatever the value is in the private variable. And then if we want to set it, what happens is when you call and set something for list price, it actually takes whatever value you have and gives it to an internal variable called value that you can see right here within the setter. And all we're going to do is take that value and assign it to that private variable we created, underscore list price. Let's go ahead and create a product class and create some properties. Go over to your solution, which is this part, and then right mouse click on the project, which is this part, and add a new class. Now what it's doing is it's loading a bunch of templates of different things that you can build and add to your project. We're going to call this product. We're going to give it a name of product, and we're going to click on the add button here. Now what it does is it brings in a template of kind of some things that it thinks you might need for building a class. The first thing are all these different what are called using statements. And these using statements simply bring in namespaces under which there are many classes. Remember the one that I had in the slide where it was system.windows.forms.something? Well, it's the same thing here. We can do system.threading.thread. And then we can look down here and we can find some different things that we might want to do. So thread is a class and it has methods and it has properties. So the little wrench next to the thing means that it's a property, and these other ones are methods. We don't need any particular classes in addition to what we're going to do, so we don't need any of these using statements, so I'm going to go ahead and delete them. Now remember we talked about namespaces, and namespaces are simply a container for a collection of classes. So in this case, I'm going to give it a namespace of C# samples, the same name as my project. However, we might actually create maybe a common library. If we're building some generic classes that we might wish to use over and over again, we might put them under more of a common namespace. I'm going to go ahead and keep everything as C# samples for now. Now, we haven't talked about scoping or anything yet. We will, but let's change internal to public. I want this class to be available anywhere. Now, you notice what Visual Studio has done here. When I hit enter, it knew that I wanted to create a property. That's the most common thing you would do after creating a class. So it gives me this grayed out thing, but I can use tab to accept that. I'm going to go ahead and change the name because I don't want to call it just ID. I want it a little bit more descriptive, so I'm going to call it product ID. I'm going to hit enter, and look at this. It's actually helping me out again and saying, well, do you want a product name now? I'm going to go ahead and accept that, but I'm going to actually make it name. Just showing you how to change things. You could accept the defaults. You can do whatever you want. I'm just trying to show you just some different things that we can do. One of the things you're going to see here is name actually is telling us that a non-nullable property name must contain a non-null value when exiting the constructor. Now, we haven't talked about constructors, but a constructor is something that helps you initialize all of the properties to a valid start state. You can either accept this and go ahead and initialize everything if you want, or you can turn this feature off where you say, I don't care to have everything initialized. This is new in .NET 6. They changed the behavior in .NET 6. If you want to turn this off, you can actually turn this off by right mouse clicking and going into project properties. If you remember, we did that before. Then underneath the build general, one of the things that you'll find is a nullable. And the nullable has changed. So starting with C# 8 or later, this is available. But in .NET 6 is when they changed it from disable to enable. I'm going to go ahead and set it back to disable because now I don't get that error message on the name property. Now again, this is kind of just me. I kind of prefer this. Depends on what you want to do. Now that we have a class with a couple of properties, let's go ahead and instantiate it and use it. So we'll open up the program.cs. All I'm doing is double clicking on each one of these to move back and forth between the couple of different files that are here in this project. So a project, as you can see, is made up of one or many files that are all related. Okay? A solution is actually a collection of projects. I only have one project right now, but I could have many more. So let's go over now and type in product. And here you can see it. I'm going to hit tab and look what it does. Visual Studio says, well, product isn't in the current namespace. Program itself doesn't really have a namespace. It has an inferred one, but it's not something that we see. Program is where everything starts in a C# application, but it doesn't really have any namespace. So it needs to bring in the namespace under which product is located, and that happens to be C# sample. So on line 1, it adds the using statement so that I can access the product class. I'm going to give it a name. I like calling it entity, and then I'll create a new instance of it. Once I have an instance of it, I can now interact with it, and I can set the product ID to a 1. I can set the name equal to bicycle, for example. I can then console.write entity.product ID, console.write, and I can put a space and then a dash, and then I can do a console.write line, entity.name. All right, so with all of that, I can now run this, and we see I get the product ID, dash, and then the name. So it's grabbing those properties. So first off, I set the properties on lines 5 and 6, and on lines 8 and 10, I get those. So it's running that code associated with those properties that I wrote, and it's getting and setting. Now again, where is it getting and setting? Well, it's holding it in those variables, product ID and name. Let's now take a look at just a kind of a cleaner method of instantiating an object. On lines 3 through 6 is where I instantiated the object and set a couple of properties of that object, but I can actually use an alternate syntax to do this. And in fact, Visual Studio says, because it has this little underline there, those little dots underneath, it says that the object initialization can be simplified, and it will actually show you some potential fixes. So I clicked on that, and it comes up and says, well, this is what it is right now. That's the part in black, and then the next part in that light gray background, that says what you can do to fix it. So I could actually come here and I could say, fix all occurrences in the document, in the project, or in the solution. I'm going to go ahead and fix it in this document. It'll show me what it's going to do, and I can then apply that. Now, I could have reworked this myself by hand, but why not use the tools if they're going to do this great help for me? So now what it does is product entity equals new. Don't put the semicolon, instead add curly braces. And now you don't need to say entity dot product ID, entity dot name. Because it's wrapped within this block, it knows what the property names are, and it will allow you to set them, separating each initialization with a comma. You've seen the short syntax for creating a property. Let's look at the full property syntax now. Let's now add a couple of more properties, but let's use the full property syntax. Now, remember how Visual Studio created those templates for me when I hit enter after adding the product class? Well, what we can also do is we can use a snippet, and if you hit tab twice after typing prop, it'll give you the small syntax for creating a property. But if you say prop full and then you hit tab twice, it will give you now the kind of template for creating the full property syntax. So I'm going to go ahead and type in decimal, and I'll hit tab twice. I'll hit underscore list price. I'll hit tab, and look what it's done down on lines 10 and 11. It automatically filled in the getter and the setter. Now I can simply type in list price, and that's it. I can hit escape, and I'm out of this mode where I was creating a brand new full property. And I'll show you why we use these full properties in a little bit. But let's do one more, prop full, and we'll do a decimal. I'll hit tab twice. I'll type in underscore standard cost, hit tab. It fills in lines 18 and 19. And then I'm just ready to type there on line 16. Now we can go back to our program, and we can now set these new properties. If I hit Control Spacebar, it should pop up a list of those properties that I haven't used yet, which is very nice. It already knows which ones I have used. And there's list price, like so. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and console.writeLine, and look at that, it automatically detected what I wanted to do. So I'm just hitting enter. Now, one thing I want to do though is if I go ahead and run this, and I apologize, I forgot the M here up at the top. If I run this now, there we go. We get the standard cost and the list price after the product ID and the name has been displayed. One thing I'd like to do is I would like to format that as an actual currency. Well, that's where we can do this toString method that you can apply to a decimal. That's a method on the decimal data type. And inside, you can pass to the toString C, the letter C, which stands for currency. So if I do that on both standard cost and list price, and now I run, now they get displayed as a currency value. Let's create a void method in our product class to calculate the profit. So go back to the product.cs, and let's add, I'm going to do prop decimal, and I'm going to add a variable called profit because we want to calculate that. Now what I like to do is I like to keep all of my properties at the very top of the class, and then down below I like to create my methods. Private void. Void simply means you are not going to be returning anything from this particular method. So like I said, we can have methods that return a value or not. Void means we are not returning anything. And all I'm going to do inside of here is I'm going to do profit equals list price minus standard cost. Now, like I said, stay consistent. If you want to use the private variables, that's perfectly fine. Or you can use the public ones. Either way works. Now, one of the things I need to do is I need to be able to calculate this profit. And when do I need to calculate it? Well, I need to calculate it whenever the list price changes or the standard cost changes. Now, when do those things change? They change within the setter. So now I can call that calculate profit method whenever a new list price is set, or whenever a standard cost is set. So pretty simple. So I've got this profit. Let's move this up a little. Oops. One more. There we go. Keep all of our small ones here, and then we'll have our standard full ones down here. And then we have our method, calculate profit. How does this get called? Well, like I said, every time you set a standard cost or set a list price, the profit will actually be set. So let's go back to the program.cs now, and let's do a console.writeLine. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to profit.toString. And all I'm going to do in this particular case is I'm going to say, let's spit out profit equals, and then let's concatenate. So we can use a plus sign with strings here to concatenate these two together to be displayed all on one line. All right, let's go ahead and think about what's happening here. I'm assigning the standard cost, $2.99, and I'm assigning the list price here. And so each time I do that, the profit is calculated. Let's go ahead and run this, and we should see now our profit is $4. Let's walk through the calculate profit method using the debugger so you can see exactly when and how this calculate method is called. Let's take a look at how this works. Let's go into the product class, and I'm going to set a breakpoint here. Remember we talked about breakpoints, and that will invoke the debugger whenever this line of code is hit. So when is it going to get hit? It's going to hit whenever this is called in the standard cost or when this is called in the list price. Now remember where that's going to happen. That's going to happen in the initialization on lines 6 and 7. So let's go ahead and run. So this is the first time it's being called. So what's underscore list price? Underscore list price, if we hover over this, is 0. Remember, because standard cost is being set first. There it is, the $2.99. I'll go ahead and continue or press F5. And now the second time it's happening, the standard cost has already been set, but this is where we're now setting the list price. Because remember, I'm setting the value of the internal variable first, then I'm calling calculate profit. And it's important that you make sure you get those in the correct order in this case. So let's go ahead and continue. And now we see the value just as we expect. Let's add a method now to return a value to our product class. Let's add a couple more properties now. So I'm going to create a date time called cell start date. I'll add another property date time cell end date, like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method. Now this one's going to be public. I want to be able to call this from outside of the product class. The private void calculate profit can only be called by anything within the class. It can't be seen by program, for example. But this one, I want to be able to call from an instance of this product class. And what this is going to do, it's going to return cell end date minus cell start date dot days. There is a days property which tells us how many days from the result of subtracting this date minus this date. That's a very handy property to have. So this returns, this thing in parentheses returns a date time, and a date time structure or class, if you want to think of it like that, has a days property. Now we can open up this program.cs, and what I can do is I can initialize now the cell start date to 10/1/2022, and I can initialize the cell end date to 12/31/2022. Then at the end here, I can now report back the number of cell days. So again, if I go entity dot, this public method shows up here, and you can see the IntelliSense. It tells me it's going to return an integer value. But if you look for calculate profit, it's not there because it is marked as private. All right, let's take a look at what we've done here now with this public method that calculates the number of sell days. And we can see that this product is going to be sold for 91 days. In this lesson, we learned that OOP is a vital part of C# programming. Now, there's a lot more to object-oriented programming, but that's the discussion for a whole nother class. But suffice it to say that you should always be creating classes, using properties to hold data, use methods to manipulate that property data. There's a lot more to OOP that we will be covering in another course. Up next, using arrays and the ArrayList class.